So Midrash Rabbah, the first Midrash in this week's parasha, שופטים שוטרים תתן לך בכל שעריך, אשר השם לוקח נותן לך לשבטיך, ושפטו את העם משפט צדק. So שופטים are judges, שוטרים are enforcers, officers of the law. We call them police nowadays. So you should appoint judges and officers or enforcers, executors of the law, and in all the gates of all of the cities that the Holy One, blessed be He, your Lord, will give to you in all of your tribes. And they should judge the nation a just, a fair form of justice. So the Midrash goes on, it says, Halacha, קרובו של אדם, מהו שיהיה מותר לו לשב בדינו? The question is a man's relative permitted to sit as one of the judges on his case? כך shanu חכמים, this is how we learned in the Braita, אלוהן הקרובים, who is too close for comfort, so to speak, when it comes to no longer being able to judge one way or the other impartially. One's father, his brother, your uncles from your father, your uncles from your mother's side of the family, etc. Why is this? למה כן? אלא כשם שהקרוב פסול להעיד, ככה פסול לדון. So just like your relatives can't be accepted as witnesses because probably they're going to be partial one way or the other. Maybe they hate you, maybe they love you. But
sorry, but this is the one that you sent this morning?
The one that I sent this afternoon.
Yeah.
It should appear in the group just before.
Seder Shoftim.
Yeah. So the Seder is a Sidra. So just like your relatives can't testify on your behalf for better or for worse, it's quite possible that as relatives they're partial in your favor. It's also quite possible that as relatives they hate you and they want to throw you under the bus. I've had situations like this come up in the past too. It is sometimes funny, sometimes not so funny. Umar ra'ayta lomar ken, and what do we see to say such a thing? Amar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the famous author of Zohar Kadosh, it is written, "V'nigishu haKohanim b'nei Levi, kivam b'char Hashem lokecha l'sharato l'varech b'shem Hashem, v'al piyem yeh kol rib v'chol naga." So the Kohanim, descendant of the tribe of Levi, should step forward, for Hashem, your Lord, chose them to serve Him and to bless in the name of Hashem, and according to them, you should sort out your disputes and this whole concept of tzara'at, these different blemishes. Bo'ur'eh, come and see, which is, by the way, typical of the language of the Zohar Kadosh, but this is a midrash. Hikish nega'im l'rivim, v'rivim nega'im. So the same way that we settle disputes is the same way that we have to make rulings on these blemishes of tzara'at. Ma nega'im bayom, afdinim bayom. Just like we only judge on blemishes during the day, so you can see with the visible sunlight, you can distinguish between the different colors if they're pure and impure. So too, court should only take place during the day. Why? Back in the day, it was so as to enable an easy reading of documents, to make sure that if any evidence was presented, that everybody saw and understood what was going on. Umar rivim parat lekarov, af negaim parat lekarov. And just like disputes cannot be settled by relatives or friends, ask me why couples sometimes get their parents involved in their fights. By the very definition of the situation, there's nothing that your parents or hers can do to contribute anything positive to the relationship. So too, negaim cannot be judged by someone who is too close to you. You might skew the judgment a little bit and make someone you don't like tameh or someone you do like tahor, etc. Or do the opposite in order to prove that you're impartial. Amar Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, atihim elagleg badin. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, don't take it so lightly, this concept of justice. For this is one of the three pillars of the world, literally legs. Lama, why is this? We have a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, it's the last Mishnah of the first chapter. There are three things upon which the world stands, meaning by which it is supported. Al-Hadin, which is judgment, justice, judicial system. Al-Ha'emet, which is the truth. Wa Shalom. תן דעתך שאם היטט את הדין שאתה מזעזע את העולם. Be careful, because if you skewed judgment, if you skewed justice, you're literally causing the world to tremble. You're shaking the stability of the world. So what does this mean when we say that that the world stands on three pillars, and the din is one of them? Al-Adin v'al-Emet v'al-Shalom. Emet u'mishpat shalom shiftu b'sha'arechem. That's the pasuk that we quote in the Mishnah Pirkei Avot. So what is that? You say the world stands on three things. It stands on three things to the exclusion of anything else. We say al-Raglaim, it's funny that we use this term because the only other place this appears is referring to things like tables. A table stands on legs.
I was
right?
going to say that
Legs
for
of
a
the
table or in geometry, when you need is to have something whole, you need 3 points.
In order to have something?
Something like, for a table just to stand, you need 3 legs minimum.
Okay, what happens if it's on 2 legs?
It's not going to hold.
It's not going to hold.
And if it's on 4, technically, if you position the first 3 pillars properly, you don't need the 4th.
So when we say the world stands on 3 legs, what we mean is what?
These are the main things that hold the world.
Put otherwise, without one, the other 2 don't stand. Emet, mishpat, shalom, shiftu b'sha'arechem. So we said din, emet, and shalom. These 3 things, not only are they related, it's that any one of them, the absence of any one of them would cause the other 2 to fail entirely. In other words, this is the context. There is no such thing as peace without justice. Very often people make this mistake. We were talking before about punishments, about the evitability or inevitability of punishments. If there are no consequences to your actions, if nothing can be enforced against you, when you make a bad decision, you decide to behave immorally, there can be no such thing as peace. By its very definition, peace can't exist when people can do whatever they want and face no consequences. Not that justice is the entire world, that we should run around enforcing things against each other, but there is no such thing as this without that. You cannot have peace without the enforcement, which is funny, because at the end of the day, enforcing things on people isn't always very peaceful. In fact, it's contradictory. It's peaceful for the guy who won the judgment. Sometimes the guy who lost goes down kicking and screaming. Not Bernie Madoff. He was happy to get caught, but it was the pressure of having to live a lie that was difficult for him. So when we say something has 3 legs, it's Chazal's way of saying that the other 2 concepts cannot possibly exist and cannot possibly survive without the other 2, the presence of all 3. Emet is another concept like this. This is fascinating. I was thinking about this recently. I had a bit of an insight on the state of modern politics. So here in America, we're fighting for the right of transgender individuals to urinate in whatever bathroom they should choose to feel associated or affiliated with, whether or not they believe it's a free choice. We have discussion about this too. Whereas in other parts of the world, homosexuals are thrown off of the roofs of buildings. That happens. There are places you wouldn't want to go as someone who's considered an aberration of what's otherwise their normalcy. Modern politicians, in particular, are plagued by an inability to fight for the truth because they don't have such a concept. It doesn't exist. So what you'll find, and it's an unfortunate example, is that when the president of the U.S. went, for example, to Kenya, started lecturing them about gay marriage and gay rights. The president of Kenya got up and said, "I'm sorry, this isn't a problem that we have here. It's not a value that we share. There are many things that we could cooperate and collaborate on, but this isn't one of them. Your society feels differently about these things than we do." But he would never make such a case. He would never make such an argument in, say, a Muslim country. Not that I've heard. Maybe you heard a speech that I missed. But why won't you be the tough guy who goes ahead and makes the case? See, in Kenya, they're not necessarily executing these people in public. Maybe society's not super encouraging of it, but they're not being executed in public as a matter of national policy, right? It's not national law that people like, in this particular example, homosexuals should be executed, probably also without much of a court, without much of a justice system to begin with. So people look for easy victories, right? It's not the truth that people are looking for. It's not necessarily true. I had an argument with someone about this who was telling me we have to fight for these rights wherever we can. I said, yeah, but why don't you go fight for them where it's a matter of life and death? Well, of course you won't, because you're going to get killed, right? You go as an activist to a country where these things aren't tolerated, you're likely to get killed. But basically what you're saying is that you're not advocating for the truth. You're not advocating for what you really believe, and you have an inability to apply these values equally across the board. So what happens when the truth doesn't exist, or when the truth isn't one of the legs of your reality, is that you try to make the impression that you're fighting for justice when it's expedient, and when it's inexpedient, you fight for peace. If I'm prepared for a fight, I'm fighting, but I'm fighting for what's right. In other words, justice can be supported by enforcement. When we say emet mishpat shalom, in other words, din, emet, and shalom, it's impossible for the one to exist without the other. So I have to constantly juggle between one and the other. I'm out of balance, is what Chazal are trying to tell you. You're out of balance if you're constantly trying to fight in the name of one or two without the third. So sometimes you'll come across as a pacifist. This, by the way, typifies most of French foreign policy from about the 1830s and to the modern day. France, where it seemed like it was expedient, or it was the valiant thing to do, they would go to war and want to pat themselves on the back and say, here, we're superheroes. And when they saw that it was hopeless, or they didn't have the fight in them, they didn't have the courage to fight, say like Vietnam, they get up and they leave and say, really, it was the honorable thing to do, was to cede control of the country back to the Vietnamese. We're not going to fight between the North and the South. We're going to leave a balagan. But at least you want to say that you left a pacifist. At least you gained something. The problem is what you've lost is the truth. So very often, the myriad methods by which Yetzer Hara likes to work, or the Satan tries to convince us of something, is by substituting one for the other, making a quick bait and switch, they call this, right? In real estate. I show you a picture of an apartment, and I say, oh, that apartment's not available, but I have one similar to it. So you responded to the ad because you're looking for an apartment. So I don't have this, I'm going to show you that. This is a very deep insight into a lot of what happens in the world, especially in our interpersonal relations. This isn't so much between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning it is, he expects us to behave. But very often, where there's a need for justice, the people who don't have the courage to fight for it will substitute peace. In other words, they'll use their pacifism as an excuse for their indolence, or for their lack of courage, for their fear. Or they'll tell you, really the truth is such and such. And what's the truth? The truth is I don't have to fight, I don't have to get my hands dirty. Because if you look at the history of this and that, so look at the story with Israel and the Palestinians, of course, the Palestinians were there, and there were Arabic speakers in Israel, and so the Jews came in afterwards. So we're not going to fight for the Jews to have a right to live there, because it's politically expedient for us to take the side of the Arabs, like most of the world does. So we'll give you an explanation that makes it the truth, such that we don't need to get involved in justice. We don't need to get involved in enforcement. We don't need to fight for Israel's right to exist. In other words, this is a very deep concept. Because there are, in this particular construct, in this particular perspective, three major items upon which the world depends, very often, Yetzer Hara will just confuse one for the other, and basically build you a table with two legs that doesn't stand. And what you need is a balance between them. There has to be some concept of truth. The truth is not to be found in constantly chasing after people, enforcing them, beating them up, or executing them. Remember, we refer back to the Gemara, where Chazal, while they still had the ability, had cancelled, they had nullified the capital and corporal punishments. That wasn't the point. The justice system wasn't working because people were so corrupt. The courts weren't going to make them righteous. Which isn't that far from Beit HaMikdash, not making us spiritual. If you think that the only way to make a society respect and observe the laws is by physically, corporally punishing them, or by decapitating them, you effectively live in a Muslim country. We don't believe the justice system is a substitute for an education. We believe you need to educate people. If an educated person transgresses the law, obviously there have to be consequences. But when Chazal saw the generation was so uneducated that the justice system wasn't going to solve the problems, it was no substitute for it, they basically quit. They said, that's it. We understand where this is going. Beit HaMikdash is destroyed because Beit HaMikdash can't solve the problem. In fact, it only becomes part of the problem. So too the courts were being manipulated. Either because people were constantly trying to get each other executed or beaten up, or because people were just happy to rat each other out and tell on each other. It wasn't because society was looking to be more spiritual that we had less work to do in the Beit Din. So there needs to be some kind of concept of justice in terms of limitations, restrictions, and enforcements of law. Otherwise, the society falls apart. There has to be a concept of peace. We can't drag every single case into court. Every single dispute doesn't have to go in front of arbitration. I mean, society can't function this way, nor can a couple function that way, by the way. I made the case many times before that obviously when you need it, you need it. But a couple that constantly needs someone else to arbitrate their arguments, unfortunately, is probably not going to go the distance. So it's a fascinating discussion. It's not just that the table can only stand on these three legs. There is no fourth leg. It's that in this context, these three things are all so interrelated and so codependent that it's impossible for the one to exist without the other. And in fact, when you go even deeper into it, very often we cover up iniquity or indolence or fear or anxiety or whatever it is by substituting one for the other. I say this is a time for justice, you say no, it's a time for peace. I say this is the truth, you tell me no. In fact, the truth is this, we have to take it to court, drag them in front of an international council, committee, etc. Beat them up. So think about this in this most unfortunate of election years, that very often when someone tries to paint themselves as courageous, really all they're trying to do is to cover up for their inability to address or fix a certain situation, and they're just substituting one leg for the other instead of building a solid three, a solid tripod in which the roads can and should and hopefully will eventually be standing on. So, see you guys on Friday night.